So what you had previously to what you are now using now with the Construction Cloud platform, is it very different? Is there a whole new sort of learning process to make sure that this is, you know, working as effectively as you need it to be?
Yeah, so with Revit MEP compared to AutoCAD systems, you had the 2D versus the 3D, which is a major difference.
Yes.
You can quickly do sections, coordination between services. You've got the cloud platform where all the team members will collaboratively work together on that system. So the pros that I would see utilizing ACC as a platform currently is improved collaboration, streamlined workflows, real-time tracking, BIM integration, and scalability and flexibility.
Right.
The cons is always, we've got the learning curve that we had to do, getting people upskilled to start using the software, and then the data migration challenges that we faced with that from going from 2D to 3D.
Was that quite a long process, that's actually changing across?
Not a long process. We had the Modena Advanced Upskill program for 12 weeks that was presented by Jessica Bailey back then, on site for 3 months, where we upskilled 5 of our draftsmen, and then those, I would say, skilled members then trained everyone else to start transitioning through to Revit MEP. And then obviously just changing all our 2D content to 3D content, our libraries and stuff that we needed.
Yeah.
And then another pitfall that I do see is that the dependence on internet connectivity, which is always seems to be a problem in the beginning, but it has changed currently in ACC, or Autodesk itself is spent millions on data security and storage solutions and that sort of stuff. So that I don't see as an issue anymore.
Right. And the likes of Beurtman and Partners, are they on the same system as well?
Yeah, so Beurtman Partners is also a strategic account for Modena. They're probably one of our largest architectural firms. They're probably one of the first ambassadors really for embracing what BIM actually is and the Autodesk platform, the Construction Cloud platform. They run a lot of projects. I think pretty much every project they run is a BIM mandated project, and I think that's where it's opened the field to a lot of smaller clients as well, to be able to work with the likes of your Beurtmans, your Spoormakers on the different projects with the different consulting engineers.
Right.
Modern's currently got about 3 or 4 dedicated BIM managers and BIM coordinators working for Beurtman, for Bob and his team. So it's been a blessing that, you know, a lot of the projects, BIM projects that are happening in South Africa does have some sort of modern technical specialist either working behind the scenes, either from a Revit point of view, drawing office, or we call them design technologists, or from a BIM aspect. So it's been quite intriguing actually seeing how a lot of these projects have been executed from a BIM mandated type of point of view, and it's actually opened the reach for a lot of organizations where they were panicking and worrying about where's our next project coming from in South Africa. It's opened the doors to now being able to work internationally.
Sure.
And I think with Microsoft Spoormaker and your Beurtmans as well, it's just made life easier that everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. And that's been quite an important part of the transition of people moving from call it the desktop solutions or their traditional on-site premise servers now to actually working in the cloud and having accessibility wherever you are, in the field, in the office, or
And are other professionals using the same system? Project managers and QSs and everyone else who's actually part and parcel, construction companies?
100%. It's been a slow uptake for different industries. I think we've seen that. Architects were pretty one of the first ambassadors of bringing in the Construction Cloud and embracing its capabilities of what it actually does. From an international point of view, it's the same thing. It's always the construction guys who are a little bit slower. But I think when it comes down to a project from conceptualization, pre-feasibility, right through to construction, handover, operations and maintain, the entire value chain is starting to actually utilize this now.
And realize the benefits.
100%.
That's right.
You will always have some industries that are laggards, but it's the sooner that everyone starts.
Are they laggard because there's a big cost implication, or does the cost not really come into it?
If I may pitch in here, I think a mention has been made of your reliance on internet connection, but it goes a bit broader than that. You are suddenly having to upgrade your hardware in office, increase your bandwidths, increase your server bandwidths, increase your ports, increase a lot of stuff that quickly adds into the millions.
Mm.
Now that is, especially with a company that's a fair size, with multiple users, that becomes a financial burden within a financial year, so it's got to be spread.
Mm.
That might be a challenge depending on where a consultant finds themselves financially.
Mhm.
I think you first buy into ACC and then only you discover what the implication is on your add-on costs
Right.
from a hardware perspective.
Yes.
So that can contribute to a bit of a slower uptake. Also, what I'm finding in the industry is some of the guys that lags, and I'm not generalizing, is like the structural engineers. Because the software they use to do their structural load modeling doesn't necessarily dovetail the ones they use. That specific company might not dovetail into the BIM model that easily. So they've got to redraw a lot of the stuff. And that redrawing period takes time. Now, unfortunately, when you do designs and you don't have the structural elements in your BIM model, and the architects sometimes try to fill that gap by creating some kind of a semblance of what the structure is going to look like. And we go on and we coordinate and we do services. And at a stage in the project, the real McCoy structure suddenly pitches into the model, and you discover fundamental issues, downstand beams and upstand beams and structural elements that affect services to the extent that a lot of rework has to happen.
Oh my goodness! And how far down the line?
Well, that depends on who you're dealing with.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so
It can happen pre-construction.
in
Wow.
fact, it happened on almost every project at the moment, which is, I think, is a problem which has to be addressed, because the rework hours becomes a financial feasibility issue,
Of course.
especially on services engineers.
Yeah.
And we yet to find a project where a stake is put in the ground to say, by this moment, freeze will occur in terms of structure, and it's all going to be in the BIM model, and we're all going to work from here on forth, henceforth we will not be doing work that we've got to redo.
Yes.
So I think if anywhere have to be given attention, it will be to get structural engineers onto the ACC platform to in real time actually show their product, to enable the seamless integration of other services.
Right.
We've actually had a session this morning on a project where this is a huge issue.
Mm.
But it's a reoccurring issue in most projects. So
Right.
talking about the downfall side, one, cost to widen your infrastructure and speed up your bandwidths and so. And secondly, is getting all the critical team players on board from the very get-go.
That's right.
I
That's
think
right.
that's why it's so important we're having, and I agree with Francois, it's one of the reasons why they are laggards in the industry is because of that, is one of the main reasons. We've also found, like you've mentioned with the structural engineers, we've seen with civil engineers as well at the same time. It's the certain industries that can cause a few little issues down the line, but I think that's also where the importance comes into it, about having the exchange of information requirements, your EIR and your BIM execution plans that identifies the exact platform, the dates, when we're going to be having these things uploaded and shared. The level of accuracy is the most important. Unfortunately, in the service engineers and building services industry, we always have to execute everything at the last minute. We get told things the latest, and we just have to make it work. It's just how it is, unfortunately, and it's not anymore where, as much as we're trying to be proactive, we're always reliant on other people's information. So that's definitely something I think you guys have really embraced and actually said, look, we're not going to see it as a challenge. We'll actually see it as, let's be as proactive as we actually can do, and that's why they have the name that they do have actually in the industry of why they execute these type of projects and on time.
Yeah. I mean, how critical is all of this, and having all the professionals when you're specifically doing a project in the middle of Africa somewhere, which in itself has its own challenges in getting it off the ground and so on and so forth. Are you dealing with a lot of the of foreign contractors and professionals, consultants? Are they on the system? Do they have their own system?
You do find that working up north, there is a level of uptake on ACC, but certainly slower than we have in South Africa, and that creates a challenge in itself. what happens, I think what one must understand of projects, which I'm sure all around the table understand quite well, is that through your 6 stages of a project, each of these stages has got a gate that's got to close. So feasibility stage 1, when that gate closes, you would assume that everything that has got big cost indicators that might make the project feasible or not feasible should have been addressed at the closing of that gate. So the parameters of cost would be set after stage 1. You know, this is the approved budget.
Yeah.
If it works within this budget and this scope, this is the way the project can continue.
Right.
You wouldn't want to revisit that during stage 2 or any of the latter stages, because that resets all the guys back to stage 1. So what you have to make sure of is that whatever take up of the model is that could affect stage gates
Sure.
must be closed. For an example, if you get to stage 3 and because of a structural engineer that has not got the right modeling on his model, it creates a scenario where structural reality causes a concept to have to be relooked, which is stage 2.
Okay, and stage 3, at what stage are you at in that project?
Well, you are then, depending on what contractual form you work, but let's assume you were working, stage 3 would normally be where you are at baseline, starting detailed design, and finite coordination.
Okay.
That's on the other side of having completed stage 2, which is your conceptual stage.
Okay.
Even worse if you are at stage 4, which is detailed design and bill of quantities and design tender drawings. And suddenly a structural element would pitch up that makes, for an example, an access floor having upstand beams that fills the complete floor and it's not suitable for services anymore. That will cause somebody to say, but let's just go back to stage 2 and see, is that still the right concept for services?
Yeah,
So there should be a red flag in the ground at each of the stage changes to say what we have on model of all services and role plays must be an absolute accurate reflection of what the decisions have been based on. And you should actually not continue past that stake until that's done.
Until it's sorted,
and I think the owners of that problem is the team,
Okay.
but also the guys that actually moderate the BIM model must be in a position to say, what I miss here, as an independent opinion, what I miss here is we don't have structural models. We should have structural models now. Where's the structural models? Knowing that once you've, obviously structure develops as all other services through stages, and they would have a conceptual model by stage 2 and they would have a more detailed model by stage 3. But judging that is a bit of an expertise. I think you would need an architect's input and guys that know building work per se. But I'm just flagging where we're seeing it going wrong. All new technology is great. The human element, unfortunately, makes new technology at risk.
Still variable. Complicated. And especially complicated when you're working out. So we're looking at an indoor arena in the equatorial state of Benin. Okay. Tell me a little bit about this project and what is the scale and the scope of what you guys are involved with here.
Working in Benin is about as far from home as you can get.
Yes.
In many ways. So it is on the west coast of Africa, having been a French colony, the lingua franca is French, which means the first challenge you have in terms of drawings, schedules, specifications is it's all supposed to be bilingual, French and English. And causing its own challenges in that once you've translated it, you've closed the gate on that stage because you don't understand what the translations say, not being able to speak French.
Sure.
And changing anything on the drawing means you've got to retranslate at cost. So that's one of the challenges that you have to take note of. We have fully embraced the BIM and a lot of its functions, including being able to create our bills of quantities out of our models. That in itself means that you've got prepared schedules, and that's all in English. And having the automated process is one thing, but once you are confronted with translation, yes,
Yeah.
it becomes a manual exercise.
That's right.
Which kind of breaks this whole automation down back to
Yeah.
its basic blocks. So your question being, how is it working up in Africa? First thing is it working in English with automated English systems is much easier than having to cross the language barrier.
That's right. But the French component, are those French contractors, or is that just having to deal with the local people?
Well, no, contracting, remember we're talking consulting up to stage 4, and then when you go into stage 5, you're basically tendering into a market, and that might be any language. I mean, you've got Turkish and Chinese and
Okay, so you got a whole
European contractors.
UN there.
So the whole lot. But,
Okay.
but generally speaking, if you're working in a French colony, there would also be French contractors. So, and the client would require you to have a French version of whatever you're doing, so that
Okay.
also he can read what you're doing. So, but Benin, as such, was an indoor arena with 12,000 spectators. It is the challenge from a mechanical perspective lay in the fact that it's equatorial, and that means that most of what you do are challenged by moisture, latent loads. I think we had more than 60% of all our cooling was spent just dehumidifying. So you actually building cooling equipment that in South Africa would do air conditioning to on that side create water. And that you take away and throw into the drain because you spend a lot of energy to create water. And little of that goes to cooling. So that was a challenge, the design of that. Also, we had to work with in an area where visiting site is a week cycle. So you've got to fly and transit and fly and transit to get there. So it's a practical human resourcing problem. Sending an engineer out to site for a single meeting means you're losing a week's productivity.
Yeah. You mentioned here the cooling capacity on site 7,200 kilowatts. Could you just explain to us how important that is and what that is?
So when you're doing a centralized cooling system such as we have with Benin, you're using cold water, which we refer to as chilled water, as the cooling medium. That's pumped around site by means of piping system, which is steel pipes. And the
is that what we're seeing here?
No, those are ducts.
Okay, those are the ducts. Okay.
The ducts are the big stuff, the piping are the smaller stuff.
Okay.
And the chiller plant is a central plant that's a source of this cold water. That's referred to as a central chiller plant, which sits somewhere on site. That's what you see there, those blocks there.
Right.
And that's 7,200 thermal kilowatts of cooling. Electrical kilowatts is about a third roughly. So your electrical input would be a third of that approximately, and in order to get 7,200 kilowatts of cooling out of it. So that's then circulated through site to each of your rooms and coils that does cooling. There's obviously no need for heating in that kind of a climate. We don't really have that requirement there.
Yes. And that's all year round?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty much a hot environment. 24/7 for 365 days. We also had just to give you an idea of a few interesting facts on that site. So the total length of chill water piping on that site is 4.8 kilometers of piping. And we had to produce 64 A0 sized HVAC drawings to show, because you still have to produce drawings for tender purposes. So that. And in 1,400 pages of HVAC tender documentation, 700 in English and 700 in French. Each one of those had to be translated by a technical translator. That in itself cost a few R100,000. And now the project is basically at the end of tender stage, construction starting soon.
Okay.
The project forms part of a larger campus that's being developed in Benin, in Cotonou, where they are.
I looked it up, by the way. It's a large port city.
Yes.
Right on the Atlantic.
Yes. And that is to reinvigorate the environment, the area there, and kind of get some form of tourism going. this forms part of a large campus where they are developing various attractions and hoping to get some movement in terms of international tourists there.
Right. Okay.
So challenges, working there also the codes. You find working up in Africa, some of the countries might have building codes, or they would have had building codes that dates back 30 or so years. That hasn't been renewed, and you will have to then use a combination of international codes, local codes, and it becomes pretty much of a free-for-all for exactly what code applies where. And you deal with that by using as many codes as you can in order to cover all bases, and then presenting it to the client in your baseline report and say, I will be basing this design on these codes. For fresh air it would be this code, for fire it would be that code, and giving them the opportunity to then agree to that. Because as you can imagine, if you have to change the code of preference during detail design stage, you are again resetting yourself back to stage 2.
Yes.
So hence the reason why you close the gates at every single stage, and probably the most important reason why projects go pear-shaped is when the gates aren't closed or left closed at each of these stages. And I think if you had to summarize the real difference between successful and unsuccessful projects is to what extent the team could keep the gates closed as they pass through them.
Right.
Therefore, my comment back to the original discussion we had and say, everybody in terms of the model has to be able to police those gates.
Right. Now that you've got to a stage now where you're going on site now, are those gates closed that need to be closed?
Look, ideally it should remain closed.
Yes.
If you work in the European theatre, if you were to work there, their contracting format, first world approach to this would be, if a gate's closed, whoever opens it pays the costs. If it's the client that opens the gate and wants to go back and reconsider a concept, there's a huge bill coming his way for all the professionals to rework. Unfortunately, it's a bit less formal in the third world environment, where to get projects going and to make sure it works financially in terms of program, you generally do things much quicker. You would think it's the other way around, but my experience is when we do projects in Africa, it happens much faster. In part because parallel exercises happen to conserve your time. You would be busy with concept while a certain element of the project is starting to race ahead, and the client would already be making consideration of changing some of his input requirements as he learns as we go along what he really wanted. So you are sitting with a very grey environment in our part of the world.
Right.
Back to who pays the bill if the gates keeps on opening. That's part of the survival wisdom that you have to develop in our environment.
Just talk to me about corrosion resistant materials. Are the materials different that you have to specify and put into place because of the climate?
Not really. South Africa already provides us with all the kinds of climates that you would encounter in Africa, with the exception of equatorial, which is just a bit more humid.
Yeah.
We would have the Richards Bay area, and so which would be as corrosive as you can find anywhere in the world. So with us working nationally, you would be having your specifications would be adapt to that kind of a corrosive environment. Yes, so when you're working coastal, in corrosive, there's a specific set of specifications that require certain paint coatings and protective coatings and materials to be used. And an inland spec would differ slightly in terms of what we use up at altitude. But I mean, those live in our specifications. It's already developed.
It's
so when
already
we
there.
work in there, you just need to know what you're applying.
Right.
What is more important is availability of resources and equipment in Benin would differ from South Africa.
Yeah. Especially maintenance now.
And knowledge base. You would have South Africa's.
So you have to train folk there in Benin in order to. I mean, your facilities management of that complex when it's completed. You're going to need to have a good team of folk on there who on site know exactly what they're doing.
That is the challenge of any developing country, is that you would always with projects be introducing new technology. because if you don't, you can't really develop that country. So when we do the Benin arena, bringing a major chill water system in there is chill water systems there, but the scale of which is relatively small. So suddenly by bringing in a major installation that uses technology that they are familiar with, but by far not in the scale they're used to it, will require them to have an adapted skills base and develop some local skills to actually deal with this installation. Now that forms part of the project. So when you go through stage 2 and 3, which is your conceptual and your baseline stages, that's being explained to the client. You'll have to invest on a separate line in the skills that's required to maintain that. Fortunately, most of your technological systems that we use in HVAC is international. So whether you use Train or SEAT or whatever, those are all coming from European and Asian markets, and they are well used right across the board in Africa. So the main equipment is common to all these countries. The local skills to maintain it,
Yes.
that's a different question.
That's a different question. Steph, do you want to add anything to what's been said?
Benin was fun. No, I think we learned a lot working on Benin projects up in Africa, just on the BIM side and the coordination side, working with all the stakeholders, where it literally improved communication due to the fact that it's a very remote project, and we had a lot of teams distributed throughout Gauteng, even South Africa. We had our own design engineer. Francia was the project lead on the project, based in Centurion office. I was working from home remotely, and then our design engineer was working from the bush.
From the bush, yeah. I read this here. Yes, okay.
We were all scattered, so
Yeah.
working on ACC and the platform itself made it a lot easier to quickly streamline the design and get the information captured and do the coordination and get the stages that we had to submit, which was ridiculous timelines. We had from concept up until tender documentation. I gave you a little bit of a graphic of how the model developed from concept stage up until tender stage, and this all happened within a year. So the timelines were very, very, very tight, and we made it work and coordinated on both the HVAC and wet services side that Spoormaker delivered, and then the other consultants on the electrical and fire, and then Burgerman on the architecture.
Right.
We all worked well at the end of the day to deliver, I think, a very well tendered package, both in English and in French. I think I picked up a few terms in French as well. So yeah, I think Benin was a good challenge for us, and we learned a lot.
Yeah, very much so. So now it's gone to ground, and what is the duration of the project?
Well, I'm not sure if it's
Everything going according to
Yeah.
relative plan.
I would say about 2 years to fully construct it. Things take a bit longer. Working through the various import routes to get all the equipment there. But you also have the tendency to stretch these things out. If you're working, the more controlled environment you're working in, the easier it is to stick to dates. But there's a lot of elements that can cause these dates to push out, and amongst others, climatic conditions,
Yes.
international geopolitical situations developing. So you are exposed to a lot of open ends. But I just wanted to add back to the ACC. I cannot see this kind of projects happening with the way in which we're currently doing it, having everybody in remote locations, happening without ACC. That said, ACC should be considered a strong chain, but unfortunately as strong as its weakest link. So probably the best way of avoiding the pitfalls that we do pick up from time to time is to make sure before you initiate the project that all the players has got strong links with ACC. You should actually not even kick off the ball if there's any players that is in any way. I actually think you should audit all
I
the
agree.
role players before the
agree.
project starts.
Yeah.
And not merely believe when
Yeah.
they promise before appointment that they can in fact deliver. Because once it gets into the role of things,
Yes.
and it becomes a patent that guys are not capable of delivering on time, that's what opens the gates.
We've seen that on a lot of
Yeah.
projects.
No, it's critical.
Unfortunately, it's something that our our team is very, very proud of, in the sense of having probably the largest complement of BIM consulting, call it technical specialists, from BIM managers to coordinators to, we've got one of the first ISO auditors as well in terms of ISO 19650. We've seen where the gaps have been in a lot of these mandated BIM projects is that they're not really mandated. It's that we're going to work on this platform and that's it. There's no follow-through, explanations, your exchange of information requirements, how it looks, what's going to be done, how it's going to be executed. These are the gates, these are the dates. And I agree with Francois 100%. These guys should be audited. There should be some proof to say, how long have you been working on the platform? What is your capacity? Do you have the relevant staff to be able to utilize the platform accordingly? Because there is a lot of gaps. We're still seeing it in projects now where guys say they are familiar with BIM and what it actually means, and ISO 19650 and the usual terminologies out there, digital twin, etc., etc. But when it comes to the execution of the work, it's not there. And unfortunately, when you have stakeholders who are very familiar with it, it has a backlash on everybody.
It's frustrating.
I would go as far as saying that to the parties that's probably going to lose the most if all players are not on the same level of capability is the fellow consultants, because their reworking is what's costing them money. It doesn't cost the client money, because the client agreed a fee and the fee's been pre-agreed and you can't change that.
Agreed.
So what should really happen is, and that's in the ideal world, peers should have a veto right on who joins them in the project, based on, amongst others, their level of ICC capability. Somebody coming into the team and this guy is not capable, you also risk for the whole team, which is a direct financial risk.
But you see that time and again.
Well, we see it repeat almost on every project, and you eventually get to know who the consultant, like we've been speaking about Burgerman. They are absolutely brilliant with regards to these ICC platforms, and there are similarly there's other architects in South Africa that's also good with it. But the point is, you get to know who the team players are that you're not going to have a problem with. And in a smaller construction industry like South Africa, even our BIM managers knows the BIM managers from other companies. So to get those to dovetail is quite painless and seamless. It is, and many times it's the guys that come in from outside, and obviously working internationally, it's going to be guys from the international field that you don't know. You don't know what their capabilities is, but you get to know them quite quick. We're also working a lot these days with international architects, more and more so. We're finding, surprise to all of us, when we started off entering into the international market a few years ago, strategically we decided to start adding to our income stream by bringing in work from international origins. That the knowledge base of South African consultants on services, at least on services, is in fact exceeding that of most of the European consultants. I believe we have, in isolation to an extent, in a bubble, had to deal with certain challenges amongst, such as financial constraints that might not have been so prevalent in Europe. And as with everything, if you are forced to find solutions to problems and you are limited by resources and cost, and so it forces you to reconsider and to, to look at your efficiencies. And in a way that, almost like sanctions, if you now look at the world and sanctions being applied, sanctions has got this double-edged sword. It kind of develops the country that's under sanctions. It forces them to develop solutions for their own problems.
Correct.
And just leave it long enough and that country will in fact excel past where they were under sanctions. And that's why we've in a way been in a bubble. We found solutions to services problems that when we were kind of let into the international world, we discovered that some of these things are still being chased by international players. One example would be back many decades. I think Spoormaker is now 6 decades, it's like 60 years plus old. many years ago, the founder of the company patented a principle of air conditioning that is referred to as variable air volume air conditioning, and it was patented through ASHRAE internationally. And that was probably 40 years back. Obviously it's before my time, but I know historically we've had a lot of patents. But that was one. As early as 1 decade ago, or 3, 6, 7, 8 years ago, the principle of variable air volume air conditioning was embraced by companies in Australia, implementing them as a solution to more energy efficient systems. That has for decades been the rule in our country. I don't think they were aware of it, and we were working in isolation. But that's one example of West Africa, in fact, has got a lot to contribute to international services designs.
Fascinating. You're also involved with the wet services. I take that being the plumbing, the water supply, drainage, sewage,
Yes.
fire protection as well.
No,
You're not doing that.
no, with services.
Heating and cooling, obviously, we've
Yes.
discussed. And irrigation systems?
No,
No,
no.
not at all. Okay.
No, because that's on the campus. So
Right.
the campus engineers deal with the stuff that's more globally associated with the campus.
Okay. And that campus is going to sort of grow out from this arena. That campus hasn't started yet. The arena is sort of like...
No, the campus is in construction.
It's also
So
in
there's
construction.
various elements of the campus that's progressed well.
Are
in
you
terms
involved in
construction.
some of that?
No, we are not.
Okay. Just
So we
this.
were involved only in this arena. There was a
Okay.
specific expertise that we had,
Okay.
and that brought us into the project. But obviously, once you start to get involved in a country, then it opens up markets.
Yes.
Every new architect you get to know, every contact you make starts opening, and this is kind of snowballing at the moment. I think, if I may say, the biggest challenge we are experiencing in South Africa, and I can see it being an international problem, is expertise, resourcing. If 10 years or 15 years ago there was challenges for certain like engineers to get work, a good engineer is worth his weight in gold at the moment, internationally. If the guy's got a 5 to 10 year experience and he's proven himself, it's hard to hang on to them.
Very much headhunted
Yes.
internationally.
And we are losing guys.
We've lost a lot of guys.
We're losing guys to markets you would not expect to lose them to, like Germany, Holland.
Where you'd think they have an overabundance of engineers. I know. Yeah.
Credibility for our guys as well, which is great to show, but it's unfortunately now leaves a gap in our own market.
It does. It's just my opinion. I think the worst is over in terms of that, because there is a lot to be said of lifestyle and cost of living that seem to be favouring us. And eventually it's about the individual, and I have the perception that young guys is adventurous and they want to see the world, but at a certain stage of their life, when they're settling down,
They want to come back.
we see them coming back again.
I did.
Michael.
Yeah.
I was in the UK
So-
for 14 years. Came
Yeah.
back, couldn't do the rain anymore.
Yeah, so we said there
And
is
now
a
you got
tide.
it, yeah.
I know, right?
The tide's been kind of turning,
Right.
and we see that, and that's a good thing.
Fantastic. No, that's absolutely great. And then once you've handed over this project, then you step away. You've done your job, or are you still very much involved in the maintenance side? Or
Working from South Africa, you can approach this in two ways. The one that we favour is stage 1 to 4, where we apply our knowledge in conceptual and design stage, and we leave the construction and implementation to the guys that is closest to the coalface in the country that we're working at.
okay.
And in a way that works for both parties, that's best for both parties. On the one hand, you get an opportunity to interact with the local engineers, and there's a lot of knowledge exchanged.
Okay.
And on the other hand, you're not taking the space of guys that has been, that is local. In a way, you're not that threatening to their own market, because that leaves them with projects to do.
Yeah.
And you're contributing in what you're best capable to do. I mean, we are not from South Africa so familiar with their local conditions in terms of construction. So it would be, you'll have to resettle people to live there, and that becomes an issue, because the method and the way of living in our country is unique to many of our people.
Sure.
They don't want to resettle up there on the west coast of Africa.
Yeah.
So we try to stick to the stage 1 to 4, and where we can avoid it, not going to the stage 5 and 6, and rather tie up with
Makes
local
sense.
guys.
Makes sense. Absolutely. To wrap, Michael, I don't know if you just want to your relationship with Spoormaker and going forward as well, and working with them on all this good
it's
tech that makes
it's
their work
exciting
easier.
for me always. Speaking normally to Rosemary and the team really about the projects they've been working on. Sometimes I get to find it out from other BIM managers, the other projects that they're working on before I've been told by them. So it's always good to see, and I think Francois hit the nail on the head earlier. It's now that they've opened the door to working in Africa, people start seeing that, oh, look at the level of work and expertise you actually do bring. All of a sudden, people weren't thinking, well, South Africa has these type of organizations who can deliver exceptional service and quality. And, you know, as much as saying, because as the account manager, I'm speaking from a person who knows industry, building services, the competition. They do things differently to a lot of organizations in terms of their staff. Staff complement their engineers of high quality, constantly headhunted. And it's when they hear, they don't leave. Testament is to the amount of staff who are 10 plus years here, and that speaks to volumes of how the organization is about empowering their people. Stephanie's taken on a role of educating and training and upskilling the teams to a very high, exceptional level, which is great, and it's something that they've embraced, and that's what makes you guys different to a lot of organizations. It's not about we know it all, we're okay, we sit back, and then all of a sudden 5 years later everyone's come knocking on your door. It's all about we are pushing boundaries at all times,
Right.
and that's the type of company we love working with. You know, a company who embraces technology, embraces change, looking for doing things a little bit differently, but also at the same time knowing they're adding value to different businesses, companies, and countries, definitely. And you know, soon I foresee probably, I mean, I said 2030 initially, hopefully you have an international office. You have one now.
You have one.
Yeah, in fact, you're going to have 2.
Yeah.
So,
You got one in London, hey? Yeah. So
and you know, to see that type of growth
yes.
is phenomenal, and I think it's a testament to how the business is run, and who it's run by in terms of the management exco team as well. It's the visionaries. It's like we know where we can play in our strengths. You know, like we said, we're not fire. We are wet surfaces, we are mechanical, but you get a lot of people, unfortunately, who try to be a jack of all trades, but not a specialist in anything. And unfortunately, we've seen what happens with those guys. They don't tend to last very long. And then it hurts the rest of the value chain down there. And I think that's been a testament to Spoormaker itself and the partners, is that partners is the main word there. They partner with a lot of companies to help uplift the entire value chain. And that's what's exciting for me, is how we all work together. I think this is where, for us, from a modern perspective, comes into it, is not just being a reseller or your technology specialist. It's about how can we support you in your vision at all times to get to where you need to do. The strategy sessions where we're going and connecting and collaborating with the different engineers and consulting engineers that are involved in these international projects and local projects. But it's also a new scheme. I don't know if you want to talk on it, Steph, is about how you basically, about the training that you're starting to bring in. I think that's quite important.
Maybe it's that the engineers training.
Well, engineers training as well as the drawing office training to upskill everyone using Revit MEP or any Autodesk software. We're going to do in-house training through Pinnacle. I've started looking at it. Thanks,
Your
Mike.
graduate program.
And the graduate program that we've done with Dio, who did a whole S&P Academy on upskilling engineers from heat load calculations through air systems, water systems, the contractual sides, financial side, QA, sustainability, Green Star. We've done all of that training with the junior engineers, and Franch has been a big part of that. I'm mentoring our younger engineers as well.
I think that speaks to a part of our company approach issues and problems. Is we have identified a resource problem about 5-6 years ago in terms of high priority of finding alternative ways of getting engineers that is capable. And to solve that, we've not merely gone and thrown money at it, because you mentioned headhunting. We in fact do not headhunt engineers from other companies. It's not part of our company profile approach. What we do is, however, is we would headhunt graduates. So we do a lot of effort in finding the best of the best from universities, and to do that, you have to be involved with universities. So you've got to put yourself out there and being involved with the faculties. It takes time, it takes sponsorships in order to develop postgrads with those universities. But by doing that and investing in the university, you get the access to the best engineers. That's a good start. Then taking that engineer through the normal mentorship in a company in the traditional way would have meant 5 years or so before he really becomes an effective engineer. That you can do, but not in our scenario, because we need people quicker. So what we then developed, we took 10 of the best and most experienced engineers in our company, principals included, and we contributed into I would say pretty much a post-grad curriculum. It's a developed curriculum with 13 chapters. And that curriculum is then taught. It's a requirement of all new graduates that start at the company to enroll in that curriculum, which is an equivalent level to a postgrad. They would then go through each of those chapters, be examined on it. If they don't pass, they've got to repeat. And they would then, after they could do that in a year, but most kind of have to redo some of the chapters.
Okay.
But let's say in 2 years' time, that guy has gone through that whole postgrad in-house. He is at a very high level of consulting standard. He's now got the legal, financial, design, human skills. Some of the chapters deal specifically with EQ, dealing with confrontation and those kind of skills that you don't find at the university level. Soft skills.
Yeah.
And by the end of that 2-year cycle, we've invested not only in terms of how we developed the curriculum, but we've invested in that guy so that he's fully financially viable for our company. And we found that in just the last 4 years, that's made a huge difference in how we and our overheads cost versus our productivity. And then what we do find is, what we also have as a company principle is, there's two approaches to this in our industry. One is you keep the guys stupid so that they remain reliant on the company. Or the other one is you empower them without fear of losing them. And you make them get the PR inch. In our company, every single engineer is required to register as a PR inch. And there's a financial a pro and con against or in favor of doing it. And so we're ending up with all our engineers are PR inches. You might find companies where they've got one principal that's a PR inch. All the rest are non-PR inch, which means they cannot sign off on designs. They cannot go anywhere. Even if they've 20 years experience, they remain reliant on the PR inch to do their work. So they're actually being held captive. That seemed to be the financial better way, but in fact it is a hidden ambush, because the moment you're not making somebody the owner of his own design, you have inherent quality and responsibilities issues. So we found it to be, in over 60 years, you empower the guy, you act as if you're not scared of him leaving, you make him become a PR inch, give him all this training, and you then look after him in a way that makes him want to stay. And hence we have never in 60 years had a drop in our level of service. I mean, even for the worst.
Goodness, it's unique.
Yeah. That's why I said they're very unique. They're very close to my heart. It's just the ethos of the company and the staff. It's different. It's literally different. It's so different. It's similar to how we are as Moderna's, that you're always empowered to learn more. And there's never a hurdle. If you want to learn something else or different department or something, you're empowered to go and do it.
Yeah.
They have the same type of ethos. It's just about you actually want to help the world do better. And when you start looking after people, that's where loyalty is born. And then you also at the same time, you take the level of your execution of your work to the next level. and that's why you are seen as the top of the food chain and as the, once you say, the tip of the sword. And you guys have done a phenomenal job around it, and it's I'm looking forward to watching what's going to happen in the next few years. Never mind the next 10, 15 years, because I know where you guys were 5 years ago to 10 years ago. It's exciting times, and I think technology is, the sooner everybody starts embracing it, that there is good and some bad, but it's also it's how you use it and what you do with it is the important part.